For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, unclinging awareness. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Are there any observations or discoveries or sharings to come forth?
I'm finding it quite challenging with the activity on the property, but I've found that keeping it expansive and calm really helps a lot. I've had to drive one day, about 3 times I had to go out, and as I drove along, just remembering to stay relaxed and open and not get all hot and bothered about the fact that I was driving a car and on an errand. So I think I know the place will quieten down after today, because the builders only work till Thursday. And Hendrik's doing the plumbing and drainage, which is extra attention at the moment, and he'll be gone today, so it will all change.
Yeah, too bad. Then the retreat will fall apart.
Exactly.
Well, in a sense, like the challenge to make it real is so valuable.
Yes.
You know, and it's almost like when we're in a really beautifully supported retreat situation, you know, kind of ideal retreat situation. Sometimes there's a sense of lack of challenge there, and it doesn't become practical, you know. And so we might be sitting there spending a time thinking about the Bodhicitta, you know, and it's like, whoa, it's the whole universe, it's so profound. But actually, contemplating bodhicitta doesn't have a lot to do with that. It's got a lot to do with recognizing how this mystery of an evolving universe is functioning both in terms of aspiration and in kind of the actuality. You know what I mean? Like, you can sometimes, you know, we don't usually think of aspiring for the actuality because there's no point in aspiring to it. It's already here. It's actual, right? But a sense of these two things we're working with, you know, between the actuality of our life, whatever it is, you know, the making food, attending to a chore, engaging with someone, driving the car, sitting in meditation, you know, this is just the kind of the actuality of our life. And at the same time, being human beings, we have this experience, it's just there, you know, to hope and aspire. I mean, it's like to cut that one out is to cut out a lot of what seems to characterize humans as something different from other creatures, you know, or not that other creatures don't have aspirations, but we can have very long-term complex aspirations. Right? It's just like there. And we're kind of learning to see the expression of this balance, if you like, between, you know, the aspiration and the actualization as studying it through the lens of interest, of like how the universe is giving rise to that, and that act of engaging with what is, and in a sense refining our skills in the balance, is bodhicitta in action. Without saying the word bodhicitta. I mean, you know, Tibetans are not the only people who have bodhicitta, or Buddhists, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a word. It's not a kind of a Sanskrit intellectual copywritten thing. It's trying to refer to not the truth of the cosmos, although sometimes we can look at bodhicitta as an objective experience, and sometimes we can look at it as a subjective experience, and sometimes we can see it as non-dual. Right? The two aren't, you can't really fundamentally separate them. So there's all these different realms of working with bodhicitta. And in this sense, the actual today's event, like right now sitting together in this class, against the context of the whole of your life, it's just a small little blip. And it doesn't really matter whether it's profound and great or whether it's kind of miserable and messy. Not in the big show of things. You know what I mean? You can look back and you say, this catastrophe happens. And you look back at it, like 15 years later at this catastrophe, and you know that at that moment you were wiped out. The whole world was shaking. It was going to what are we going to do? And here you are 15 years later, and it was sort of like, well, that was interesting. It's just gone, right? And yet, on one hand, that's true, and yet the living of our life is only made of these little unimportant things. You know what I mean? Like there is no life other than just this moment here, and this moment here, and this moment here. That's all we actually have to live with and work with. And because we can conceptualize a kind of omni-time-space kind of vastness, right? We can sometimes, in a sense, fool ourselves into losing touch with the kind of just small, humble, just this and this and this and this. And actually, it's way easier to have a sense of working with the profound vastness, right? It's actually much more difficult to have the kind of patience and persistence and increasing confidence that really giving yourself fully to just driving along and just suddenly realize that your shoulders are more tense than they need to be. And that's the work. You know what I mean? Like at each moment, or like a concept and so on. And then, or a kind of rigid, I'm not particularly focused on tensions to relax, but I'm just sort of noticing that my view is kind of like this, and I suddenly realized it could be like this, right? So sometimes our work is just like a kind of an enlargement. This is why it's called Mahayana, right? Not an ultimate greatness or magnanimity, but a direction of greatening and magnanimous making or something like that. It's kind of, and this is the vehicle of my life. And this is where we begin to really, to me, we can talk about bodhicitta in terms of, aspiration bodhicitta. And so that's at that level where it's very, very valuable. This is a practice. It's not just a delineation. This is a stage where the most useful meeting with bodhicitta that we can have is to constantly refresh an aspiration to encourage wisdom and compassion in and around us. Right? So it's very much a kind of wishing and a hope, and you may do that with stickers inside the fridge, and little random text messages that you program for yourself to come in on your cell phone. I mean, nowadays, the kind of modern reminders. In the old days, right, they used to have prayer flags, and religious architecture, and kind of regular religious ceremonies and so on, right? And one of the big purposes of that was just to kind of remind people of a larger aspiration than just being lost completely in the kind of competition, struggling, fighting, dealing with, right, of daily existence. Okay? And then gradually, though, through this aspiration, right, there's a big difference between a person who has a really solid, well-established aspiration to develop wisdom and compassion and a person who does not have this. There is a big difference. It's still just at the level, the person who's got it is still only at a level of wishing, right? But there's still a huge difference. And then gradually, though, this disposition, right, to have a tendency to, it's almost like a shifting of our values from my value to survive to my value to understand and participate. It's like it's shifting, right? Gradually, we wouldn't necessarily describe our practice of bodhicitta as one of aspiration, but we might start to describe it as application or maturation, right? First of all, application, and then as we become more skilled at it, it becomes maturation. And so our work at that stage, we could say in a sense, like when we talk about wisdom and compassion, we could use different words, and we could say wisdom, we could maybe talk about sublime understanding. That sounds pretty far out, right? A kind of, the sublimeness to me has a sense of, I don't want to just replace sublimeness with another word, so and the compassion side, right? We could talk about skillful means, right? Increasing skill in the way we engage in stuff, right? And so our application bodhicitta is very much the work of extending our skillful means and extending the kind of sublimity of our knowing, it's like both in terms of enlarging our knowing, but also refining our knowing. I think of sublime as something quite refined and almost so refined that you could almost say it's ethereal, but it's not. It's very there, but it's not there, right? It's kind of ungraspable. And so the wisdom side gets associated with that spacious, open, ungraspable, unpin-downable quality, and the compassion side gets associated with skillful means and a kind of increasing confidence in one's capacity to meet with the unknown skillfully. Because that's all we do, right? You can't train to meet with the known. You can only actually, this is in truth, people think they're training to meet with the known, but in actual fact, if their training has any use at all, it's training for meeting with the unknown. Right? And so if your training is so specialized that it can't take into account the whole universe changing and transforming and morphing and mutating as it goes along, then actually when it comes to the action, you won't feel that you've got the equipment. I've got the confidence to do this because I've done it lots of times and I know I can do this. But that's different from I have the confidence to do this, and the this that I have the confidence to do, I can't yet imagine. Right? But there's a sense that I can step into this new situation. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I feel confident that when I'm there in the doing, something will emerge and I'll be able to learn from it and adjust and work with it in some way that's reasonably not unwholesome. Just humble. Just is reasonably not unwholesome. Right? But can you see what I'm getting at, right? The difference between the person who doesn't have that confidence. It's as if I've got to know exactly what it's going to happen, when it's going to do, what do I do, what's expected of me, all this kind of thing, which is reasonable enough if the situation that you're preparing for is the situation that arises. But if the situation that you're preparing for is not the situation that arises, you're stuffed because you're completely prepared for a square hole and it's a round hole. Or, try, you know what I mean? It's like the fit doesn't happen. Which isn't to say, sometimes people say, well, there's no point in preparing, when you get there, you'll get there. But that also is not true. And conceiving that the possibility that application bodhicitta and maturation bodhicitta is kind of encouraging an increasing saddha, like inner confidence, a sense of a degree of mastery. I almost hesitate to use that word because we've kind of so loaded it and it becomes way more exaggerated than what I'm talking about. Like I've mastered quite a few skills in my life. I can fry an egg. I know how to turn on a tap. Right? I've mastered that. I've got absolute confidence in the bones of my being. I have mastery of that. Right? I've kind of mastered, how to get out of bed in the morning when I'm feeling crappy. Took a lot of practice and so on, and experimenting this way and that way and so on. I've mastered this. Don't think of mastery as just being some exaggerated kind of thing with Stradivarius violins. Right? Like, just in a sense, like a lot of the things that we take for granted, you didn't just suddenly stand up and walk the way you do today. That took a lot of stumbling and crawling and bumping into and losing your balance and toddling and delight in achievement and then dismay in failure, right? As you gradually, you are masters of just being able to get up off your chair, stand there for a few minutes, take 3 steps, and then come back to your chair and sit down. If you really think about it, like how many 286 different muscular systems or something are all engaging to stand you up and walk you away. Like God knows how many synapses have to happen, right? And it didn't just suddenly all turn on. Right? So this kind of mastery is like what I'm talking about is almost like a familiarity of confidence, which doesn't mean that it guarantees you'll do this, right? Because, I came back from I remember very, very clearly from the prostatectomy, when the surgeon came into the room less than 24 hours after the surgery and said, you'll be going home in a few hours. And I'm sort of lying there with all these tubes coming out of me, and I go, don't make me laugh, because it's like, this is kind of really an absurd idea, right? That I could possibly, and I was out of there in less than 24 hours. And we got home and somehow managed to get home and somehow managed to get into the house and somehow managed to get to the bed. And I sat down on the edge of the bed. And then it dawned on me that I had no confidence that I had any skills to be able to go horizontal. I didn't know how I was going to lie down. Between me and lying down was an imagined gulf of unimaginable pain, right? And it was like you didn't know how to move your body or anything. It was like I had a long period of feeling like I was a kind of in an infant's body as an adult. It was kind of strange juxtaposition, you know what I mean? Like I had to learn my plumbing function all over again. Right? Like this, and then that makes you realize, wow, I had all these skills. Not only that, but I was kind of a master of those skills. The master of the skill is someone who's not worried about whether or not they can do it. They have a confidence. They meet with the thing. It's a slightly new situation, and mastery means that you can make adjustments to the new, unexpected situation, and still, in a sense, end up with something that feels satisfying and worthwhile. Whether you're writing a piece of music or carving something or painting or writing or engaging in an organizational relationship with people, right? It's the same thing. You have a kind of feeling, you don't know where it's going to go, but there's a difference between the person who can walk into, nobody knows where it's going to go, but some people walk in and they're worried and kind of tentative, and because of that it inhibits their engagement. and other people who come in with a certain degree of confidence, of course based on experience, and then they can do this. Right? So then how am I working on bodhicitta here? Like, it's just like learning skillful means and a kind of expansive vision. And along with this, we begin to see there's these two other qualities that we're working with too. It's not separate from the idea of bodhicitta. There's a whole process in our human experience. Jung talked about individuation, right? And it's in a sense like the emerging of a cohesive, coherent sense of individuality, right? And that, of course, implies a certain kind of arbitrary, usefully defined boundary, depending on the situation and circumstance. You know what I'm saying? Like the adult, for example, who has not been very successful in individuation, right? Is in a muddle over themselves and others and where they begin and where their responsibilities end off. I mean, it's very difficult to operate, right, with an unmatured sense of individuation. Right? And then there's another thing that we're working with, which is not only are we in a kind of an ocean of process of individuation, and that's why, in a sense, like, I'll demonstrate for you, or I'll point out your experience to demonstrate individuation, right? What are you seeing in front of you? Now, if we were to take the time, we won't, but if we were to take the time and then ask each one of you to describe what you are seeing in front of you, every single one of you would unfold a different description. And yet, collectively, without saying anything, we generally say, oh, well, we're all together, we're all seeing the same thing. I mean, I'm seeing something different because I'm looking that way, but you're generally looking that way, so you're kind of generally seeing the same thing, right? But actually, when we look into the detail, we're not, and we see that, in a sense, the demonstration of your individuation is that your experience is unique in the universe, and we exist in the field of our own knowing. Right? And this process of individuation, which goes way beyond what I think Jung was particularly referring to, right, goes right into the depths of understanding the nature of mind and knowing, right, in a very Buddhist sense. Right? And, if we were to look at, for example, if you look at bodhicitta, try and come back to this, I'll stay with this one. Right? So we've got individuation is working this way. And then the other side of it is we could think of it as enculturation. That we actually exist in community. That we do exist completely and utterly in our own field of knowing. There's nowhere else that you exist. But difficult to comprehend if you just want black or white or this or that. Difficult to comprehend. We also live in community, right? And in this sense, we are, we a communal dynamic, if you like, of society, culture, an evolving biosphere, and ultimately the cosmos, right? An evolving dynamic, right? It's just like, it's complete, like we're sort of in this awash on the timeless beach of now, we're kind of like this sometimes I think of ikat weavings, that ikat is a type of weaving that is very well known in Central America, but also in Indonesia. And it's a mind-boggling art when you first find out about it, and actually even when you later find out about it, because usually when you weave something, you have different colored threads, and you weave the threads together, and a pattern emerges, the chosen pattern of your tapestry or your weaving, right? And it's made up of the mixture, if you like, of the different colored threads. Right? But in ikat, what they do is they take one long, umpteen kilometers of thread, and then they dye the first meter green, and then the next, and then 2 inches of yellow, and then a little bit of blue, and then a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and so on. And they dye the string, and then they just weave the string back and forth, and the picture emerges. It's just mind-boggling, the skill that was involved, and this is an ancient art. They've been doing it for a long, long time. The patience and the mindset that could do that, right? And so the thing is that the picture isn't separate from the strings that make it up. If you shook the fabric out and just revealed the string, there'd be nothing left, right? And it's like you and me. We exist in a fabric of culture. And if we take all the details and just shake it all out, we disappear, right? We just appear in the weaving of the culture, and we appear for a time in space-time knowing, and then, it disappears, kind of thing. It's like extraordinary. And we could say, in a sense, like this kind of communal dynamic, right, that involves society and culture and biosphere and cosmos, right, is the kind of generative matrix that gives rise to us. At the same time, it's the generative matrix that is giving rise to this sense of individuated person. And we talk about this kind of, we could, in a certain sense, we could say that the union of wisdom and compassion is the union of these two. The individuation, unique knowing of the universe, and the kind of social dynamic, right, of culture and family and more and more inclusive to the whole thing. And how this works, the weavings of this as it unfolds, and moving from aspiration to know this to kind of application and maturation in being this, until eventually we come to realization bodhicitta, which is the union, simply that there was unbroken union from the very beginning. Some Tibetan lamas have devoted their lives to teaching on the subject of bodhicitta. There's plenty there. It's not that they're being boring and just saying the same thing over and over and over again, right? It is such a, we're talking about the whole universe. But coming back to Anne's gift to us, because in a sense it focused something which was so important, right, is that when we to work on bodhicitta, right, this second section, Contemplating Bodhicitta, right, is to consciously value engaging with it at the level of life circumstances, of the collision of individual and communal that allows at this moment, right? And the more we kind of engage with it, the richer it becomes. It's interesting that citta also means mind. So sometimes bodhicitta gets translated as awakening mind. And you would probably have an incredibly different view of engagement with bodhicitta, more important, engagement with bodhicitta, if you start with the idea that the universe is made of fundamental building blocks, for example, such as geology, chemistry, atoms, stuff like that. And then somehow they assembled themselves, and then somewhere around, 4 billion years ago or something, some miracle took place and we started having self-replicating chemical systems, right? And this is the beginning of life, right? And then, a question that I've heard many, many times over the course of my life of teaching and involvement with people on this is it's not an obsessive question that comes all the time, but, it keeps on popping up, particularly people who are studied in Eastern philosophy and religion. And it's sort of along the lines of, well, at what point does the consciousness enter the organism or the being? This could be very gruesomely and agonizingly accompanied by the question of abortion. At what point is it okay to abort, and at what point is it not? Well, now the person's conscious, but before that they were just meat or stuff. You know what I mean? And so, if you have a sense that the universe is the fundamental structure of the universe is this kind of bedrock of inorganic stuff, and then by some extraordinary, wondrous miracle and so on, life came into being. And the bodhicitta is like evolving out of that. I think, and you go, awakening mind, right? I think your way of understanding and engaging with bodhicitta would be different than if you had a really deeply ingrained sense that interbeing implies a degree of interknowing. That if there's any kind of interbeing, there has to be interknowing. And so that the only place where there's no interbeing is the place where there is only one. Can you see this? You could say maybe the only being who doesn't participate in interbeing is God, or the totality of the universe, because by definition there's no other to interbe with. You know what I mean? But as soon as anything short of that, there's interbeing. If you got 2 hydrogen atoms in the universe, you got interbeing. Right? And I know this is just a way of, in one sense it can sound just like playing with words, but I have personally found it a very useful playing with words, right? To ask myself in a deep way over a long period of time, not just a quickie one afternoon, right? Like, how do I identify that something is conscious? And how do I identify that something is non-conscious? Because I think this is completely, if we're going to talk about consciousness and knowing, it's reasonable that we could identify what we're talking about. Otherwise, we've got nothing to talk about. And so I realized I couldn't just keep on going on about consciousness and knowing without looking at, like, how do I kind of vaguely know what knowing is in me, because I know. But, like, what's the difference between looking at a corpse, especially if it's someone who, when they were not a corpse, I knew, right? So someone who you know is like living along, and then they die, and then they're a corpse. It's not the slightest difference. No, there is a big difference, right? What's the difference? You go, so-and-so. They don't reply. Get a little closer. They're still not replying. I know, maybe they'll breathe in my ear. So I put my ear down to their nose. No, they don't breathe in my ear, Oh, maybe that's not fine enough. Maybe I'll hold a mirror in front of their nose, right? And see, maybe what I'll do is I'll take a stethoscope or and some fantastic old-fashioned hornpipe, right? Instead of putting it on the woman's belly, right, to listen to the fetal heartbeat, I'll put it on her heart or his heart and listen to the heartbeat. And I don't hear anything, So gradually I start suspecting that this person is non-conscious, this is going to sound very, very crude, but there's nothing wrong with using this kind of crude to to illustrate it clearly. Not for a moment would you ever imagine, right, pushing this loved one into a furnace. A furnace, and burning them, right? And yet there are some beings, I've participated with one dear friend, and we pushed his wife into the fire, right, for the cremation, which was something that felt like a most completing and good thing to do. And yet, you know, like a few days earlier, we wouldn't have, you know, like even the thought of it is just kind of horrifying, right? So, you know, in a sense, like there is some big thing going on here, right? The person's not conscious. Even what we call consciousness in terms of conscious and unconscious in surgery. You know, we want the person to be unconscious when we cut them open, right? Even though it's very obvious that when we cut them open, there's a lot of knowing that's still taking place, right? I don't mean for the patient, if the operation goes well and smoothly, right? It's almost as if you just have this piece of your continuum tape snipped out. It doesn't exist. It's kind of very peculiar, right? It's just like ceased to be. Like with no consciousness, you cease to be. But you didn't necessarily cease to be for other people's consciousness, right? And so when I looked into consciousness, I began to see that the only way I could tell whether someone was conscious or some creature was conscious was whether or not they responded to some various types of stimuli. If they did, then I made the assumption that they're conscious. I mean, nowadays with all these zombie movies and, you know, vampire movies and so on, I suppose we could imagine, right, a person who's still conscious, right, but totally unresponsive, or vice versa. I don't know what, you know, it's bizarre, but in the ordinary world that I live in, right, you see an animal on the side of the road and you can't see any blood or injury or anything. You're not quite sure whether it's stunned or dead or what. And you kind of maybe tentatively nudge the body, right, and be ready to jump back in case they bite you. And if they respond, you go, oh, they're conscious, right? They are responsive. Now, if you see that, in a sense, responsiveness is a demonstration of knowing, and if you see that mind is that immense matrix that supports and gives rise to knowing, that which knows, right? Then we begin to see, and we start to look at, and we see the whole universe is like that, right? As soon as there was more than one hydrogen atom, we had knowing. Then all of a sudden, bodhicitta, which is awakening mind, awakening field of knowing, is something which has been eternally there for as long as the universe. It didn't just start with humans. It didn't just start with animals. It didn't just start with multi-celled creatures. It didn't just start with single-cell creatures. You could almost say it didn't start, right? And our way of like investigating this as something that feels a little bit more arbitrary and philosophical and thought out, or something that we're beginning to see, no, we're looking at this process which has involved all of us, and it's an awakening mind, but it's awakening heart in the sense of aspiration and capacity to connect. Right? That's the in a sense, when we were in the womb, we grew eyes, and in the womb it's relatively dark. You could make a reasonably good argument that there's not a lot to see, right? And not only that, but you could make a reasonably good argument that you're so well looked after that you don't need to see, right? And yet you grow these eyes, right? I mean, we all think about it's so wonderful that we live in the here and now, but actually biology doesn't merely live in the here and now. It grows things that are completely useless now, right, for an important task to come later, as if it knew that when it came out of the womb there would be light. Right? You could almost say that the flesh aspired to the light, aspired to see. Right? You know, I aspire to learn how to swim, but I won't go near the water. Well, you go, well, that's got a bit of a phony aspiration. Whereas I could aspire to learn how to swim, and first of all I go and wade and paddle, and then I duck down, and then I jump up and down in the waves, and you know, one day my waves knock my feet out from under me and I don't sink and I float, and you know, sort of slowly, step by step, I become greater mastery at swimming. Through cultivating this immeasurable, all-encompassing expanse of spontaneous love and clear-seeing presence, right? Of kind of spontaneous capacity to appreciate the legitimacy of others coexisting in relationship with ourselves, right? This is like bringing together individuation and culturation, right? They're not separate. How on earth we can think that just sitting in silence without the slightest bit of disturbance in some kind of holy meditation is where it's really at, and whereas actually building a house or dealing with plumbing or engaging with friendships and so on is kind of just distraction and samsara. It, you know, if some alien from outer space would look down, and I think they'd be quite reasonable to say, these guys have gone right off the rails, right? Here they are, evolving stardust, and they're looking for some conceptual samadhi or something to kind of, you know, make life reasonable, instead of, hey, you exist, isn't that good enough? So we have a sense like thinking in terms of love as this just extraordinary, rare capacity to kind of radical appreciation of the other as they are in themselves, rather than as I need them to be for my needs. Okay? And coupling this, how can we say coupled with clear-seeing presence? Because without clear-seeing presence, there's no appreciation of other. It's not love and clear-seeing presence, it's love clear-seeing presence. This is our work. Realize we're cultivating this. This is cultivating bodhicitta. This is like cultivating, in a sense, something that's already there. Maybe even that phrase sounds funny. Maybe it's familiarizing with it. It's becoming awestruck by it. It's coming into a sense of reverence and wonderment that, holy Moses, I never realized I was given this. And you've been given this, and here we are. Wow. And I don't really think we're going to spend our whole lives just going, wow, 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 you know, on that kind of, right? If it was all wow, it wouldn't be wow, right? But at least at the beginning, like in terms of our practice, our aspiration, our application, our maturation, it's like we begin to have a sense that somehow being able to open the sensitivity and the wonderment and the skills and the capacity to find the living that I am in relationship with others worthy of engaging with interest, with curiosity, with love, and so on. This is bodhicitta in action. So through cultivating this immeasurable, all-encompassing expanse of spontaneous love and clear-seeing presence, may we loosen the hypnosis of samsara. And we, you know, in a sense, when I first met with Buddhism, and I dare say, I bet for some of you, that samsara was this kind of, you know, name that designated a kind of messy, problematic situation. Right? And so, it's almost like the idea was either you're going to escape from samsara or annihilate samsara or something like that. But actually, samsara is not a problem, right? It's the hypnosis of samsara that's the problem, right? And it's kind of like we get drawn into, like I am bodhicitta. Oh, I'm sorry, I goofed off. I'm a consumer, right? Oh, I forgot, I'm a voter. Oh, I forgot, I'm a soldier. I'm an artist. I'm a this, I'm a that, right? This is the kind of, yes, in conventionally speaking, your individuation, we could sort of have a general in the eye of an observer. It doesn't hurt to call this person an artist or a teacher or a doctor or a musician or something like that. But actually with the eyes of bodhicitta, we say, yes, and then we add about 500 million pages, minimally as long as the Avatamsaka Sutra. And that's to describe each being. May we loosen the hypnosis of samsara in a very gentle way, right? I mean, I've tried to make the words of this sadhana such that a broad range of humans might find them inspiring. But the broad range of human beings might include beings with a Buddhist background, right? And beings with a Buddhist background will begin to he's sort of hinting at, this is sort of a bit like the four thoughts to turn the mind towards Dharma, right? And we're seeing the kind of the precious human manifestation, right? This capacity for panoramic awareness and ceaseless concern, right? We're looking at the kind of hypnosis of wandering around blindly. I can't remember exactly how he derived this, but Rinpoche years ago, Namgyal Rinpoche, did a kind of a word derivation on samsara and showed us with his big dictionary there that it literally meant, samsara means to wander about aimlessly and blindly, right? It didn't say to be a shopaholic or a drug addict or a this or that or the other. It was just like to wander about blindly, right? It's the fundamental thing. And you begin to look at our culture that you're living in, that you're practicing in, that you're aspiring to continually remember bodhicitta in action, and the continual bombardment of messages that in a sense are saying, well, conform, be normal, settle down, get a job, whatever it happens to be, and it's different from culture to culture. You're in a Buddhist culture, come on, right? Wander and study and explore the universe. Don't be stuck anywhere. That's a seduction. It's a hypnosis because you have to learn how to find everywhere just staying in one place. Then there's the person who stays in one place all the time. Let go of the clinging, wander and travel and see. You know what I mean? It's like so don't think of samsara as something that they, unwashed types, have, right? Whereas we, Dharma people, kind of are already well on our way out of it. No, it's more insidious. The nature of a hypnosis is you don't really realize you're hypnotized. Right? And so looking at the suffering of samsara from the point of view that if you can hold this large scale, these four thoughts that kind of orient the mind to bodhicitta, orient the mind to Dharma, right? That they're there, that by recognizing the kind of massive amount of suffering. Look at the refugee situation today, the climate change situation, the sixth extinction situation. It sounds trite to call any of them situations, right? They're just engulfing disasters that are gobbling up our world, right? And you realize so much of this is built by just blind, unquestioning, and so like my response could be, well, let's take all the lunatic politicians, we'll put them in a big spaceship and send them to Mars over a one-way ticket. And they can go out and build walls and make armies and march little tin soldiers up and down and have their fun. And we who love life can stay on the planet and make a beautiful world. Right? It was kind of a nice thing to do, right? I can understand that. But instead of having that kind of angry, frustrated, sci-fi, futuristic wishing we could deal with samsara, you go like, well, in what way do I contribute to samsara? This is what might come out of this. I realize wandering around blindly and occasionally, too occasionally, I am part of this blind wandering. And I can't do anything about your blind wandering, but I can kind of just gently nudge a small amount of the communal blind wandering that I am in a direction of less blindness, of greater sensitivity. Right? So it's like meditating on the suffering of samsara to just firm this question of, my God, it's a tragedy, the tears are flowing from my eyes as I see how interconnected we are and how much we hurt each other. Right? This is not, it's an unpleasant, it's not a nice meditation, right? But it can provide, in a sense, it's part of a motivation, an aspiration, right, to realize, make real, right, bodhicitta in our living. And then you have, meditations, for example, on karma, right, cause and effect, karma. I mean, karma just means activity. It's a trite meditation on fate and how if you were stingy in a past life, you get born poor in this life, right? That's a trite meditation, right? A profound meditation is when you begin to realize that, first of all, there is movement, and out of the dynamic of movement comes responsiveness, and out of this responsiveness comes collaborations of responsivenesses, and a kind of evolving of complex knowings which then can name this dancing unpindownableness as a Jamie, a camera, a plant, a cough. Right? In a sense, we bring forth the things of the world out of this dynamic. Right? How does this work? To meditate on karma is to go deeper and deeper and deeper, not only into seeing the kind of fluidity, but wondering, like, what does that imply? If the whole universe is action and interaction, then what does that imply to how I should live and how I could live? And right, what does that have to say about the dissonance between how I do live and how I'm beginning to realize any sane person should live? And this is to contemplate this. This is to contemplate bodhicitta. Right? And to meditate on impermanence and death. Right? It's like impermanence. It's like, this is Hinayana meditation. Small view. Right? In other words, meditating on what's not there. Right? But this is Mahayana. So what happens when Mahayana meditates on impermanence? Disappears. There's no impermanence. Right? There's suchness. There's, right, fluidity. Suchness. It's like, I mean, suchness is just a great word because it's like, as far as I want to go with words, it's sort of such as it is, right? In the total dynamic of weaving that we are, this ikat of the universe. So through cultivating this immeasurable, all-encompassing expanse of spontaneous love and clear-seeing presence, may we loosen the hypnosis of samsara and release into the ocean of collaborative creation. Okay? When we think, when I say release into the ocean of interbeing, it can feel too passive. So all I got to do is surrender and release into the ocean, and then it's all hunky-dory. But in actual fact, each moment is creating, bringing forth, gestating the next moment. And now, as an individuated human being, speaking in an ordinary sense, right, my capacities of creative action are far more there. There's intent. That's why that's heart for awakening, not awakening mind, but awakening heart, right? In a sense of like a profound yearning and passion for and interest in and big heart for. To release into the ocean of collaborative creation, and a kind of just to sit there, smiling, breathing, present, and identifying this moment of sitting where you are with cicada and sunlight and this and that and the other, right, as a collaborative creation. Like, I couldn't do this without cicada. I couldn't do this without photosynthesizing pangas, right? I couldn't do this without mat and cushion and camera and you, right? And like how does that change the situation? Instead of seeing it as I am sitting in this, imagine for a moment exactly the same situation is we are collaboratively creating. And to begin to see bodhicitta as a kind of an ocean of collaborative creation, right? Going from this kind of imagined philosophical pre-beginning, when presumably there was nothing, to the beginning where there was the beginning of something. I mean, look, there are these improbable stories, like we arose out of the dream time. How ridiculous, right? And we got these kind of improbable stories, how we were kind of pulled up out of the sea, right, with a fish hook or something, right? And then there's these other really very wacky people who think the whole thing came into being in the midst of a big bang. I mean, I honestly can't see that this idea that there was nothing and then there was a big bang and the whole universe started happening. To me, that's not a more believable story than God did it in 7 days. I mean, it's just completely outrageous, right? Because we simply cannot deal with anything but the living that we are. Like we only know the knowing that's taking place. We can't know the knowing that didn't yet take place. So we can't even conceive of a time when there wasn't this. We make a thing, but then that's a kind of just a conceptual knowing that floats in our knowing now. But it's just like having anesthetic for an operation. You just go blank, hopefully. I know, thus have I heard, some people don't go blank. They appear to go blank, but they don't, and it's terrible agony. But fortunately for me, I feel it was fortunate, I just went blank. Count backwards from 10. 8. Oh, good, you're getting conscious. You mean it's done? Oh yeah, I guess it's done. It's like yeah, gone, right? It wasn't like there was a blank. There wasn't even a blank. The only reason why I figured there was a blank was that one moment I was lying there perfectly okay, and the next moment I'm lying there, I'm immobilized, and there's tubes coming out of me, right? So then I make a story that something must have happened between then, and I call that the operation, but I don't actually know anything about it. The operation is just a thought that arose in my mind. It's a kind of surmisal that I've collaboratively fabricated along with doctors, nurses, technicians, and hospital administrators. And so in a sense, there was no one, there's the beginning, it's beginningless. That's why in Buddhism we sometimes talk about the beginningless endless, because it's not trying to say that there was some extraordinary thing there. It's just like, beyond this, I cannot speak. Beyond this, I cannot know. Right? And so we can only operate like, well then how about at least knowing in the place where I can know? So releasing into an ocean of collaborative creation. As long as you have known anything, there has been collaboration. There has never been a moment in your existence which has not been a collaborative universe. A lot of collaboration to cause all that misery in your life. Right? Everything was collaborative. Right? And yet, if you think about it, you'll realize there's some times in your life where you're not thinking in these terms at all. You're not seeing or understanding this situation as a collaborative situation. You're understanding this situation as a kind of conflictive situation. Me and them, or this, and then there's a whole lot of other stuff around here which isn't part of it. You know what I mean? Like I'm worried about so-and-so or that situation. And meanwhile, I'm so worried, like the trees there, without the trees and the light and everything, I would cease to exist. But I just completely ignore them, like they have nothing to do with what's going on, because there's just me and the thing I'm worried about. Right? So to suddenly realize collaborative creation and become somehow interested in appreciating some of the collaborators and how this comes about. Right? May we manifest ways of living that uplift all beings. Right? And so although I'm explaining these sections in such a way that you can get a glimpse that potentially they could be huge, gigantic, complete paths in and of themselves, from another point they're just steps in a sadhana. And so your preparation, find a comfortable posture, strengthening posture, settle into a place that's relatively still and awake, right? Remind yourself of this mystery of bodhicitta. Take refuge. And yet each one of these, which we could skip over really quickly as if it was just a little thing, it really, I have found extraordinarily valuable to go into in more and more richness of depth and detail. Are there any questions or thoughts, or how does this sound? I mean, does it make sense? I mean, obviously, I think it makes sense. Right?
Sounds enlivening.
Yeah.
Just to expand on this idea of knowing.
Yes.
I think a lot of what you were saying, parts of what you're saying, are kind of pointing at what I've been thinking about. This interbeing into knowing. It seems that a lot of our individual experience is information processing of our sense organs, coupled with memory and perception. But if I was to say that I know my dog, it's like it goes beyond just the characteristics of my dog that I could explain to somebody else. There's like an intimate connection there.
Yes.
That is beyond words,
yeah,
but very real. And you could almost say the same about a pot plant that you own, or something that there's a deep connection with, which is also known beyond information processing.
I think it is I don't want to dwell too long on this now because we've done enough this morning, but I think it's very valuable to loosen our sense of how broad the term knowing might be. And instead of thinking of there being one knowing which is correct or incorrect, maybe consider the possibility that I'm a summation of inconceivable numbers of knowings, all interweaving simultaneously, cells with cells, and molecules with molecules, and so on. And so where we get confused with our use of the word is we talk about knowing and quite often translate that into the knowing of a fully functioning human adult, right? And then when we talk about knowing in a plant, we can't see, it doesn't make sense to us that the fully functioning knowing of a human adult is going to be the knowing that a plant would have, and so we say the plant doesn't have knowing. It's no consciousness, right? But I think it's very, very useful if we start to realize that this is an assumption, and the only thing we know about consciousness is that we associate it with a capacity to respond in certain predictable, in non-random fashions. Right? So you know, I mean, if you call out Tarchin, and I turn towards you, you know, and then you call out Mary, and I turn towards you just as fast, and then you call out Sue, and I turn towards you again just as fast. You might, first of all, you have the idea that I know I'm Tarchin, but now you're starting to think, maybe I'm just responding to sound. You know what I mean? And if I take a tight skin, like a drum skin, you know, like, and I yell into the drum skin, right? And I have a kind of very fine camera and I'm photographing, I'll see that the drum skin also responds to sound. So Tarchin's no more conscious than a drum skin, right? Right? What I'm trying to point out, there's more to it. You know, there's layers and layers and layers, and I think part of our deepening mastery and understanding of Dharma, it's an increasing capacity not to become confused about which domain we are referring to. And we're clear about that. And that means that our speech becomes more precise and more useful, in a sense, right? As we do this. Because people muddle up, they have huge arguments over consciousness and when it happened, and really someone else could look in and say, hey, you're talking about completely different domains of experience. Like, if you realize this, you might not be having an argument. You'd realize, no, kind of from this point of view I agree with you, but I was talking about from that point of view. Right? So the idea of kind of a matrix, an ocean of sentience, of I don't mean one sentience or one knowing, which is oceanic and kind of moves. I mean, you know, there's just, and all these knowings, and then this knowing here of me speaking with you is a collaborative creation of like immense knowings. And this is how in Buddhism we can really meaningfully say it's all mind. And it's got nothing to do with dismissing matter or anything like that. Yeah. Any other thoughts or observations or questions? Or
I have something playing out. And the question is, how do we organize ourselves better? I don't have the answer to it. I'm listening, thinking, we humans, I continually pull myself out of a living truth. I'm going to struggle with my language probably. It's not like it's not like it's not true, it's just not precise enough to what's actually going on. So then there's a moment of remembering back into the flow. I don't know. Just the question of how we organize ourselves that we can remind each other more often. I guess that's called a retreat.
Well, I think another way of looking at it, the question isn't how can we organize ourselves so that. It's like, how do we organize ourselves in a way that most wondrously facilitates the creative collaboration of the universe? Because in a sense, and this is why I think it's very worthwhile, and when I'm asking you for questions or observations, it's partly because I'm trying to invite the space for you to try and express the inexpressible. I mean, if your work is going well, you'll be on the edge of being a little bit frustrated with how you're going to describe what your experience is and so on. And yet if you look at it, you know, you see like a culture is woven together by all sorts of different connections, but one of them is language. And so, you know, we talk to each other about things we bought and things we'd like to buy and places we're going to go and things we're going to do. And yet an awful lot of the people who talk about these things these things, for them, these things are not the most important thing in their life. But they don't talk about the most important things in their life because it's too difficult. It's too difficult to put into words. And so we kind of intimate it, and we show our love or something by maybe giving a thing to someone, right? But there was an intimation. It's like what you're talking about, Kyle, with there's more to the relationship with the dog than just photons and name, right? And so in a sense, by encouraging situations where people can feel safe enough and appreciated enough that they could take the risk of sounding a bit foolish or a bit confused as they try and express a richer, more dynamic, more fluid understanding of the living that they are, and that we learn to do this with each other, we actually begin to bring new languaging concepts into the culture, and we transform the culture in the process of doing this. I don't think we can find a way to do it. Now I know what to do, now I'll do it. The doing is something your doing is going to involve me and us, and so it's actually a living cultural process that's taking place as we go. And this is why I think languaging is extraordinarily important. And it's one of the reasons I think why the internet is inadvertently contributing to just mega explosion of suffering. Because the subtlety of language that's happening on social media and blog sites and news sites and so on is getting less and less subtle. It's like there's no feeling in it. There's no, like sending little emoticons or whatever they're called, little smileys or little bundles of flowers, that really is not the same thing as, engaging, right? And so we're not actually developing language right now, we're losing language. The Oxford English Dictionary is shrinking because it's based on usage, and they're finding more and more words simply aren't being used, and so they get funneled off to the side, and the dictionary gets smaller. We've got smaller. It's like, hey, it's really great. Oh, it's cool. It's like cool. It's really cool. It's fantastically really cool. It's not cool. It's this is relatively limited, right? It's just like we're capable of a richer, more evocative language. We could aspire to be poets, right? In a community of poets. Right? So I mean, it's what you're asking. I think is like a really pertinent question. But I see the steps forward from such a place of inquiry as an actual. It's not a technique or a thing. It's a doing, and realizing that lots of people feel like I don't want to say something that makes me sound stupid. I don't want to say something that kind of shows that I'm confused, or you know what I mean. So we don't. I only want to say brilliant things or smart things or meaningful things. And so that means that this place of experimentation right on the edge of trying to kind of blend words with richnesses of feeling and physiology and obligation and hope and so on in a way that feels more in tune, we never get a chance to develop that. And so our society doesn't develop.
I was thinking, before we ever started reading your sadhana, and I didn't see your cultivation of the garden, but when we first talked about Samantabhadra, the image of a vast field of soil that had to be planted very closely came into my mind, and then I thought, it's a bit bland, it's a bit uni colour. And it occurred to me, not that I know a lot about Aboriginal art, the pointillism
Mm.
it better described it.
Yeah.
The colour and the movement and I don't think anyone's ever explained to me what that pointillism
Kind of dot painting.
means,
Yes.
means to Aborigines.
Yes.
But in that same sort of thought, words sometimes are inadequate.
Mm.
I mean, you're talking about type of knowing.
Mm.
So graphically, sometimes we can say something that says it.
Well, as you're speaking, you're going like this, right? No, but that's it. Because it's not just the words, like the tone of your voice, your gesture, and so on. And we get multimedia. Yeah, maybe we should paint our things, and and sing our things, and dance our things, and we communicate at so many different levels. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Tomorrow we will move to section 3. We're tearing through sadhana. May the day be well and the night be well, and the midday hours bring happiness too. May both day and night always be well. By the blessing of the Triple Gem, may all be auspicious. Sarva Mangalam.